Hello, my name is Abhay. I'm from India, Bangalore, India. So today I thought I was gonna cover some combinatorics, like which is 1/4 of um, what Math Olympiads are about. Give me 1 minute. Right. So in particular in you can say that in combinatorics and Math Olympiads, there are two very different kinds of things that appear. In one is counting, like when you need to count the number of some things that happen, and those appear a lot when you're in the beginning, right? When you're starting out with Math Olympiads, say permutations and combinations, questions like how many ways can you arrange these things, such that in how many ways can you arrange n objects in these many um these many ways or something like that. But more often than not, as you go ahead, you'll see combinatorics problems which are more logical problems, right? So they involve logic and deduction, etc. And I want to, and you, that's very little theory. You may know this, that combinatorics has the least theory of all types of Olympiad problems. And this is because it's basically logic, right? What you use is logic. But the thing is, you need to train yourself with certain ideas and build your intuition as you go ahead. And I want to go over some of these ideas that appear frequently in combinatorics problems. um, right. So my main theme of the handout I sent is algorithms, right? So algorithms are step-by-step processes, and we can use algorithms in many ways. That is, we usually sometimes we use algorithm, we make the algorithm to solve a problem, and don't worry about this. But first I want to start off with this section, section 4, which, and I want to concentrate on something very specific here, where we are given the algorithm, that is, we're given a process, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. And we're asked to analyze it, right? We're asked to find some property of the thing, right? So for example, you can look at example 13, right? Just as an example, what are they asking in example 13? They are saying that you have certain a set of numbers. Say we have 5 numbers, a, b, c, d, e, right? And we can choose any two of these numbers and change it into, say for instance, the GCD of a comma c and the LCM of a comma c, and b, d, and e, right? You can always type in the chat or something if you don't understand something, right? If I'm being vague. um so this is a process, like something is happening, we are having a step, and they're asking us to prove something, that they're asking us to prove that we cannot do this process after some point, right? So this is a process, and they're asking us to prove a property of the process. So I want to concentrate on these types of things for a while, and these appear quite frequently. um so we often have many tools to some ideas to analyze such questions, which actually are in general are applicable to the whole of combinatorics and even other areas. But nevertheless, these two are very important ideas. So the first is the idea of the invariant, right? An invariant is, as the name suggests, a quantity which does not change in a process after you changing something, but the invariant doesn't change. For instance, in this thing, in this set of values, um, the product of the 5 numbers doesn't change. Can you see this? The thing is, the because A into C is equal to the GCD into the LCM. It's a common thing, right? The GCD into the LCM is the product of the two numbers. The product of the 5 numbers, B, D, and E, remain the same. So the product of the 5 numbers is an invariant, right? And we can often use an invariant to analyze the situation very well. So whenever there's something changing, right, in a question, like you may not be given the process, but whenever in a question there's always changing, there's something changing, it's a good idea to see what's not changing. For example, in this, the product is not changing. How can this help us? Well, for instance, in the most vague way, we can in a naive way, we can say that, for example, if our initial set is 1 2 3 4 5, this cannot go to something like 240 comma 1 comma 3 comma 5, I don't know, it cannot comma 4, right? The number of numbers don't change. So you cannot go from this set to this set any day, right? You cannot go from this set to this, anything which you cannot go from one set to another set if the products are not equal, right? So this is something we just found out, and this might be useful, and we'll see. I'll solve this problem in the near future. I just wanted to show you how what invariants are. So an invariant in general is a quantity that does not change, right? Similarly, a monovariant is a quantity which changes only in one direction. That is, it only increases or it only decreases, right? I'll show you an example of a monovariant soon. So whenever something changes, again, the general idea is to look for something that does not change, and it'll help you. So I'll show you an example soon enough. Right. The next very important principle, which has universal applicability, is the extremal principle. So what is the extremal principle? It's a basic guideline. That's all. When you have a lot of things, look for the minimum or the maximum, right? For example, it might be, and it actually is helpful in this problem, to look at the minimum number in the set and see what happens to it. Okay. For example, you might notice that if A is the least number, the least number cannot increase. That is, in this set, the least number has to be lesser than or equal to A. That's because the GCD of A comma C is lesser than or equal to A. And if A or C is not the least number, then the least number cannot increase in any chance, because if, say, B is the least number, then B is still there. So it's the least number has to be lesser than or equal to B. And this will be useful in the thing as we go ahead. You'll notice we'll do this problem in more detail later. But the extremal principle can also say apply when you have a table with values. Look at the row which has the least value. You know, I'm being really vague here. Or when you have a grid with points marked, look at the leftmost or the rightmost or the highest or the lowest one. I'm sorry. This may tell you some things, right? It's a general principle. So with that being said, I just want to try example 12. I think I can give you a 1 or 2 minutes to just read the question maybe. I'll just erase all this. Just read the question, example 12. Right, so give me 1 minute. I'll just. Right, so. Okay, so the question stays, you can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Right, thank you. So the question states that we have 3 types of balls: white, black, and red, right? And say there are some certain number of white balls, certain number of blue balls, and certain number of red balls. I mean black. So in one step, you choose 2 balls of certain 2 colors and you replace them with a third ball, right? So you can say choose two white balls and one white ball and one black ball, and replace it with a red ball. For example, if the initially there are 3 white balls, 4 blue balls, and 5 red balls, you say if you choose 1 white and 1 black, it becomes okay, I'm sorry. It becomes 2, 3, and 6, right? Because you're taking 1 white and 1 blue and replacing it with a red ball. So, and the question is actually, to be honest, a little vague. It states that if there is only 1 chip in the end, right? We don't know what that means, right? So, initially you can see the first thing you can notice is that the number of balls totally reduces by 1 each move, because you're taking 2 balls out and putting 1 ball in. So that's a monovariant. So notice that the total number of balls is a monovariant. It continuously decreases. In any case, this process has to end at some point. So it'll either end when you only have 1 ball left, or it can end when you have all the balls you have are of 1 color. So these are the only two possibilities for the process to end. So either you'll have one left, or you have the balls, all the balls that are left are of the same color. So like make sure you can see this. That's the only way this process can end. Um, so and they're saying that only one remains. That is, they're ruling out the possibility that the number of balls, that like in the end you say you have only 3 white balls left, right? They're ruling out that possibility. And they're saying that that ball, the color of that ball will not depend on the process you got there, right? And they're asking when this final state can be reached. I'm sorry. So this is a really vague question. To be honest, this is a vague condition, right? They're not saying much. So we have to analyze ourselves, right? So in the end, you want something like 100. That you want something like 100, and they want you to make sure that whatever happens, um, the one that comes is only white. Like you cannot reach a configuration where you have only one blue ball left. So you should notice that they're asking you the steps that they're giving you. The process only relates one step to the next. Oops. They only relates one step to the next. That is, the process that's given only describes how to go from one step to the next, while the question they're asking you is about what initial configuration you have, so that in the end, you have only one ball left. So asking you to relate two completely different, very far off things, right? So in general, as the principle states, as I said, you are given a process. So we try to look for an invariant, right? Now the number of balls is different. So what other invariant can we search for? So you'll notice that the difference between these two balls is the same, right? That's because we took one ball of each and put in the other. But the difference between these two is initially 2. Between white and red is initially 2. Between white and red is initially 2. It becomes 4. Here the difference is initially 1. It becomes 3. So you'll notice then we see something. The difference between the number of balls, right, of say of 2 colors, it can only stay the same, or it can increase by 2, or decrease by 2. Okay, so we can build up a case where it decreases by 2. One thing is for sure, if the difference is between these two balls is initially odd, it will remain odd. So this like an invariant we found, and we can so this one invariant we found, right? So we can probably use it, the parity. So I think you might have heard of the term parity. The parity refers to um sorry for my bad handwriting. Parity refers to the odd or even, right? So the parity of the difference between two colors remains the same. I hope you understand the statement, like the progress we've made so far. This might be helpful. So let's see what exactly that means, and notice that where I'm actually writing down a concrete case, right? So in general, when you're given something like A white, B black, and C red, it's a good idea to write down something concrete and try it, right? Try out more examples, etc. And you could even probably this example, it looks like a good idea to even go the other way back. Like you could backtrack, say from here where can you go? So if this one must have been here initially, you should have this, right? In the penultimate step you should have 0 1 1 if you had 1 0 0. Anyway, we have something to work with, and let's see where that takes us. Where we try to juice out as much as we can from the invariant we have. So initially, say the difference here is 1. Say between white and black, the difference is 1. Notice that the difference between white and black can never become 0, because it can only stay the same, or it can increase by 2 or decrease by 2, right? So the difference between white and black can become 3 or 5 or -1 or -3 or -5, that way. It can never become 0 or 2 or 4. On the other hand, the difference between this is white and black. The difference between say white and red can only become it's initially, how much is it initially? It's 2 initially. So we know that it can go to 0, it can go to 4, it can go to -2, and so on. It can never go to 1 or 3 or something, right? So this is something nice. This has to always be true. These differences can only take on certain values. Okay, admittedly it's a large number of values, but we know, for instance, that the number of difference between the number of white balls and the number of black balls can never be 0. Okay, so how does this help us? So since we have something at the beginning and something that does not change, it doesn't change till the end, right? So once we find an invariant, we compare the beginning to the end. So, say we have, in the end we need one of certain color. We have one ball of a certain color, right? This is the end configuration. We have one ball of a certain color, 0 of the other two. But notice that the difference between these two balls is 1. The difference between these two is 0, and the difference between these two is 1, obviously. um Look, the difference between the white and red can never be 1, right? But it's, if there's only one of these things left, that is, there's only one of a certain color left, the difference of chips or balls between this, the number of, say here, say we want this to be white, say we want this to be white, then between white and red has to be 1, or white and blue has to be 1, right? But the difference between white and red can never be 1, because it can only be 0, 2, and 4. I hope you're understanding what I'm trying to, the direction I'm going for here. This means that white can never be the one in which you have one chip left. Similarly, even red can't be, because if this is red, then if this is red, then one of these two has to be white, and the difference has to be 1. But the difference cannot be 1. Okay, I might be getting a little messy here, and it's always important to get messy in a problem. Like, try as many values as you can, and you'll notice that it's important here that this means that in this case, we definitely have the black has to be the one with the one chip left in the end. So here we have proved something, that if we have 3, 4, 5 as the starting values, then here black has to be the one with the um, in the end with the one, it can be the only one with the uh, one chip left, right? So, and that's, since in the question they are telling you that one chip is left, if just one chip is left, so they are telling you that only one chip is left. So for this case, for this very special case, we have proved it, that in this case we know that it happens, it works. So let's try to generalize this, right? So what do we have here? We need the fact that if, say, the three colors, I'm just going to call the three colors X, Y, Z now. So say X can be blue or something, Y can be red, and Z can be white. It doesn't matter. Um, if X is the one with one left, then in the end, um, the difference between X and Y is odd, right? So even in the beginning, the difference between X and Y has to be odd, right? So X minus Y is odd. It's a odd number. Similarly, Y minus Z has to be even, and X minus Z has to be odd, because 1 minus 0 is 1, and 0 minus 0 is 0. So see, notice that this actually, we are losing out on a lot of information, like vaguely. This is a really vague thing. We're looking at something very specific. We're only looking if it's odd or even. We're not looking more than that, right? But we need this to be true even in the beginning, because this doesn't change. We need this to be true even in the beginning. So say X is initially even. Let's take two cases. Say X is initially even. We'll take the case where it's odd as well. Then Y, look, X minus Y is odd, and if X is even, Y is odd. Similarly, even Z is odd, right? So, so if we have three numbers, that is the three types of balls are even, odd, and odd, the one with the even one will be the only one with the one chip left, right? It satisfies our conditions. On the other hand, if you can notice that if X is initially odd, then Y has to be even and Z has to be even, right? So in this case, the one with the X will be the one left. The one which is odd will be the left if the other two are even. What about the other cases? Like what other cases possible? The other two, there are two other cases possible. That is when all three are even or all three are odd. And what happens then? Well, you'll notice that if all three are odd and all say all three are even, then it's impossible to get to the state because the differences are even. Even in the case where all three are odd, say if you have all three odd, if you have say all three odd, the differences between any two of them are even. So the difference can never be one, but which is required, right? If you want to go to this final state 1 comma 0 comma 0, this is the difference between the 1 and the 0 is odd. So you can never reach this final state if these are the parities, right? So you can never reach one final state of this the parity. So we don't care about these because they have told you that you can reach one final if one chip is left, right? So this is our answer. That's it. We're done. If we have the answer is that if two of them are odd and the other is even, the one which is even is the one which is going to be left at the end, and the one which is odd is going to be left in the end if the other two are even. Okay, so that's this problem, and I just okay, I may have been messy in this problem, but I want to recap on a few important things. We found as soon as we have found an invariant, as soon as we have found the process, that is, they gave us the process. Something changes from something to something. We found an invariant. Okay, that's very important. Find an invariant. It'll often help a lot. Then um, after this, we compared the initial state to the final state. Right after we tried out a few values, try out a few values, try to understand the nature of the question, try to find out. You have lots of time in a math Olympiad, so try to understand the question better, right? So try out as many values as possible, and in the end, we after we are sure that our invariant worked, we compare the final value to the initial value. And by doing so, like we know that the invariant doesn't change, so the invariant has to be the same for the initial value and final value, and from there we extracted our answer, right? So that's how you. So I hope you understood how we use an invariant. Like one example of how we use an invariant. Um, are there any questions? Like it would be helpful if your questions, any question about this question is solved right now.
I don't think they are on.
Okay.
Okay, like, can you like revise once, like, from the first step,
Oh,
just
sure,
for
sure.
the.
I'll do that. I'll do that. Okay. So what did we do? So first we have so we understood the structure of the question first. We tried to see what the question is about, and what the question is saying is if you have three different types of balls and they're giving you a process, right? They're giving you something that we do to the three balls. That is, we take out two balls of different colors and add in a third one. So they've given you a third one, and they're asking us to prove something about the final state. So that's something that they've given to us. And what do we do about it? We say, okay, we don't have much to work about here. So since they've given us something that changes, let's try to find what does not change. And after a little experimentation and thought process, we found out that if the difference between, say, the white ball and the black balls is initially even, it will always be even. Okay, this is something we found. Like in a math Olympiad, when you're doing a question, you need to experiment with different things. An approach may or may not work. And this is something we found out in any case, that the difference between the two things is odd. Say in this case it's odd, it will always be odd. If the difference between the two things is even, it will always be even, right? So this is something we found. And then we say, okay, let's compare this to the final state. What is the final state? The final state is something with 1 comma oops 1 comma 0 comma 0, because there's one ball of something left and 0 of the other two, right? So this is the final state. And notice that we have proved that the differences, like if the first two are, if the difference between the white and black, say the white and red in this case, is even, it has to be even always. And in this, and if we notice, if we compare this to the final configuration, even the previous one must make sense. The rule that we just said must make sense. The difference between the white and the red, like one of this is white and the other one is red and the other one is black, the difference between the white and the red has to be even, right? Because it was initially even, or odd if it was initially odd. And the only possible case is, and this is a very specific scenario, right? We're just trying out cases. We'll generalize later. So that's what we do. We try a specific case and we generalize later. Oh, we let this be. Notice that the only possible scenario is this is white and this is red. That's because if one of these is white, the difference between the other two, that is, if this is white, right? If this is white, then this or this has to be red in the end, right? If the last one, if the thing left out is white, then you'll notice that the difference between white and red in the end has to be odd, because this is 1 and this is 0. The number left is here is 1 and you have 0 red balls left. But that's not possible because 1 is odd and initially we had an even number, the difference was even, right? So we found a way to make our invariants useful, because our invariant became really useful because we were able to compare it really nicely from the end state and the beginning state, right? And once we
Yes.
have this, our problem is almost over. We just have to directly analyze. We just need to generalize, right? Okay, I think that's another question. Did I answer your question? Like, is that okay, or I forgot who asked? Okay.
Akash?
Um, what I think is the number of
Uh,
step in which you get required configuration equals. Oh, yeah, that's right, right. That's right. If you the number of steps to reach the end step, if you might see, because the number of uh, see, the total number of balls decreases. Oops. The total number of balls decreases by 1 each time. So if you have A balls, B balls, and C balls here, the total number of steps to reach the end will be A plus B plus C minus 1. Right? That's a good observation. Right? I hope this question made sense to you and how we used an invariant. So the most of this question was just the key, the crux step of this question, as you might call it, was to notice the invariant. After this, if you keep trying it, after some time you will get the solution. But the key step was noticing the solution. After that, it's just normal work, right? Um, right. I hope you understood that. So I'll come back to question 13 in a minute. I just want to do the question 14 for a second. It's just some help with an invariant of some a certain type. It's not a process, to be honest, but I thought it would be helpful to put it there. Right. So this is what the question states. Or you could just read the question for a minute. So the question states that if you have some if you have some certain number of points on the plane, right, and we connect the first point to the second point, the second point to the third point, the third point to the fourth point, and back to the last. So we form a certain type of loop of straight lines, right? It need not be a closed polygon. It can intersect with itself as many times as you want, right? So we have something like this, right? And they're asking if it's possible to draw a straight line through the interior of every one of these segments. For example, here it turns out to be hard to do because there is this one segment connecting this and this we will pass through in this line. And if we change it a little so that it goes through that one, it won't go through this, right? And you might notice that it's actually impossible to do, right? It's impossible to draw something like that. So anyway, I think we should start at such high places. We should try to analyze some smaller values, right? Okay, how about a triangle, right? If look, they've given you 1997 points, right? They've given you 1997 points. I hope everybody understood the question by now. I was just showing an example of how the question works. Um, so they've given you 1997 points, but we can replace 1997 with anything we want, because 1997 we cannot actually draw 1997 points, and so we'll try for smaller values and try to generalize, right? So that's a general strategy we use. If they've given you a really high value, it's always more helpful to prove something in general than for that specific value. So how about for 3 points? Um, so given 3 points, you can always form a triangle, right? Or in the case, or if the 3 points are collinear, you'll get a straight line. And it might be something you know by intuition or you have actually heard of it, but it's actually not. And you can actually see it directly. You can't actually draw a straight line that passes through all 3 of these line segments. It's actually not possible. Like it's very, you can't do it. I mean, it's hard to prove why just like that, but you can see why it might seem hard to prove, but you can see why it should be true. And you can't obviously draw here in this case as well, because if you pass a line through this, it won't pass through this, and if you pass a line through this, it won't pass through this, right? So we're just trying values here. Okay, we don't know what we're doing. We're just trying values here. How about for 4 points? Well, it's obviously not possible in a square for similar reasons as a triangle. But unlike a triangle, we can arrange 4 points in different ways, right? What if we order the points 1, 2, 3, 4? So then we'll have something like this. And this is a different shape, right? And you'll notice that we can actually draw a line here. So it is possible for 4 lines. See, this line I'm drawing is passing through all 4 of the segments. So it turns out to be possible for 4. So at this point, you could probably make a conjecture saying it works for odd, but it works for even values of L, but not for odd values. But that's a good thing to do. So you should make conjectures and try to prove them true or false. The crux move in this problem is changing your perspective. Instead of trying to draw the points first, let's draw the line first. If you're ever stuck in a problem, try to change your visualization. Try to change how you're visualizing the problem. It'll help a lot. So in general, say if you have a line, so this is our line, say this is our line, and let's try to actually prove that it's not possible for 3 points such that all the 3 segments pass through the line. So you say the first point is here, and the second point has to be on this side. And actually, if you notice, just by changing our visualization, we have just observed something really nice. If the first point is here, the second point has to be at the other side. And the third point has to be on this side. Right? But if the first and the third points are both on the same side, they can never cross the line, right? You have to be at opposite points of the line to cross it, right? So we have actually proved properly that for a triangle it's not possible. And if you have actually noticed, we're done in the general case, because let me erase all this. It looks messy. We're done in the general case because if we're done because if say we have 4, we can draw the first point here. It doesn't matter. The second point here, the third point here, the fourth point here, and back to the first point. And every one of these line segments, by definition, because you're crossing the thing, has to come back. And if you have an odd number of points, after you go after you go how many ever times you want, you will come to the same side, because after an odd number of times you will come back to the same side, right? I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. And then you can never cross the line because you're the same side, right? So we've just proved that for any n odd, we cannot, like in here, they've given you 1997. This must be from a math Olympiad in 1997. Um, so we have proved that this is not possible because in the end, both your points will come on the same side. Now, this not really a process, and it's not really fully tied into the theme we're talking about here. But I wanted to just point out the importance of changing our visualization, right, in this problem. Instead of, it actually might seem trivial, the fact that we know first we were drawing the polygon or whatever, and then drawing the line and trying to make it fit. And that's something we would, that's what the problem statement forces us to do, right? It has given us, it has given us points and saying, can we draw a line that passes through them? But we need to look through that and say, okay, what if I draw the line first and then draw the points? And then the problem becomes almost obvious, right? It's something that you can do always. The crux move was changing our visualization, right? So that's a very important idea. Changing visualization, right? I hope are there any questions? Did I explain this question properly? Any questions regarding this?
I think none.
Okay, then you can always type it in the chat if you have any. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so I don't know if you have seen this problem before. 1 second. Right. So okay, we'll do example 15 now. It's a Putnam problem. It's a very nice question. It's quite a popular question, actually. So you can just read it for a minute. Okay, I hope you read the question. So the question states like, say in the case of n equals 5, always try for a specific concrete case. You have 5, say, red points and 5 blue points, right? And they're asking us if it is always possible to join one red to one blue. So you'll have 5 segments such that none of the 5 segments intersect. And you might have seen this problem before. It's quite popular, as I said. But it's a nice question, right? And we really don't know what to do, right? The question might seem vague, and we really don't know what to do. So we need to put our head back and think, right? Let's actually. So we know that in the general case, we don't know what to do because we don't know where these points could be. One might be on Mars, one might be I don't know. It can be wherever you want. So we actually don't know what to think, right? And we know that connecting randomly won't work. Like, say we try something, say connect it to the nearest point, right? So that's something that's the first thing that comes in many people's minds. Connect a red point to the nearest blue point and keep doing that for everything. But that need not give the closest one, right? So for instance, if I connect this and this, and I connect this and this, and I connect this and this something, then if I connect this to its nearest point, it will pass through this. So this intersection criteria is not being covered. So I'm just trying out some random things, right? So that strategy doesn't work. Doing the nearest while doesn't work. So, and why is it related to a process? So one idea we could do, right? And one very general principle is that if you don't have something to work with, get something to work with, in the sense that If the question has nothing you know what to do something upon, however forcefully, try to change something so that you can work on it, right? That's something you need to, in a math Olympiad, keep always making progress in the question. Even if it looks ugly, make progress. It'll help you. Um, and in this case, I say, okay, since I don't know what to do at this point, oh, do I have one less red point? Okay. Right. So we don't know what to do. Randomly connect the things. Let it intersect, right? Let it intersect however we want. I don't know, randomly connect. Something like that, something like that, something like that. Right? Sorry for my bad drawings, but we randomly connected it. We can always do this, right? Randomly connect one red point to one blue point. So we have 5 segments. And say, maybe we could think, how about we uncross the things, right? Start randomly, start at a random configuration and uncross. So this would become, so we uncross, say, these 2 segments and make it this, right? So initially you may think that if you have like you have this and you make it, you go from 4 points here to like something like that. You might think, okay, maybe I'm making one less intersection. That's the whole goal, right? We want to reduce the number of intersections to 0. Um, so that's what we're doing. So look, I actually just changed the perspective of the problem here by doing this. I started from a random thing. It might have many intersections. I say, make as little intersections as possible, right? And now I introduced a process of uncrossing. The uncrossing process, that's a step. I introduced it. And it's actually quite natural, to be honest, right? Because we want to reduce the number of intersections. We we uncross. So you might think that reduces the intersections by 1, but that's not the case because uh, I just showed one example here, but like if you have some line like this, you still have one intersection here. So the number of intersections hasn't changed, right? I hope you can see what I'm trying to say here. If you change these two to these two, right? This is our process. We uncrossed. Um, this line now intersects with this. And if we have, say, 2 lines here, this will become, in the new thing, we'll have an extra intersection. So the number of intersections actually may even increase here. So this is actually kind of bad. We like, if the process was such a way that the number of intersection was a monovariant, which means it always reduced, right? That would have been nice, right? But that's not the case. That's not what's happening. Um, so you might abandon this approach, but you should keep your mind clear at some points, right? You'll notice that in specifically, um, the process, that is the uncrossing process, is separate from the invariant, right? We have a process and we're trying to look for an invariant or a monovariant, but clearly the process did not match a monovariant. So maybe we try to search for a new invariant or a monovariant, right? And inspired by our first guess, that is the idea of distances, choosing the minimum distance thing. Uh, I'll erase this looks horrible, I think. What's up? Yeah. Uh, Inspired by our distances thing, let's try to think of what happens to the distances, right? And another reason why we do this is the following, right? Why is this creating new intersections? Because we're actually concerned when we are uncrossing and changing something, and we're looking at the number of intersections. Okay, just try to understand what I'm trying to say. When we're looking at the number of intersections, um, the number of intersections also depends on the geometry, that is the positions of other lines. That is, it does not only depend on these two, it depends on these two as well. It depends on everything else, the number of intersections, because we're moving this line to a different place. So you could probably notice that a good invariant, a good or a good monovariant, a good quantity we want to analyze will only depend on these 4 points, right? And I'm sorry if this was vague, but two of them are red and two of them are blue. This is red and right. So those are red and those are blue. And just to recap what we have thought of so far, we tried a few approaches. One approach was that we tried to connect a point to the point nearest. Actually sounds natural, but that doesn't work out. As we showed a concrete example where it doesn't work out, so it doesn't work out. Um, then we say, okay, we don't really have much to work with here, so let's give ourselves something to work with and connect the points randomly, right? And then we say, okay, maybe start uncrossing so that it all works out. But in this case, we show that the number of intersections doesn't reduce when we uncross. And we try to analyze, see, it's an important thing to see our mistakes, right? Why did the number of intersections why did the intersections did not work? That's because if we took these 4 points, these two red points and these two blue points, and say moved it here, moved it down here, the process would work. So clearly the number of intersections, this quantity we're looking at, the number of intersections, which we're trying to make 0, right? It depends on the geometry, it depends on the position. So of these 4 points with respect to the others. So maybe it would be helpful to find a quantity which does not depend on the thing. That is, it depends only on these 4 points, right? And the number of intersections is not one of them, because the number of intersections depends on the positions of the other lines as well. That is, if you have 2 segments here, then obviously you're creating more of these here, more intersections. So what quantity exists which depends only on these 4 things, right? Now this might not be clear, but as we and it needs to depend on the line segments, right? It needs to change or not change something. One idea is the distance between these 2 points or something like that. But clearly that remains same forever, so it doesn't really matter, right? But leave that alone. But we need to concentrate on the line segments. And we notice, try to look at this quantity. The sum of distances of all the line segments, right? The sum of distances of all the line segments is here is whatever, if I call this point A, B, C, D, here it's AC plus BD. And here the same becomes AD plus BC. Right? My intuition at this point tells me that this is a good invariant. Why? You'll notice that when we analyzed example 13 initially, we found that the GCD and the LCM, right? We found the product of the 5 numbers is the same. And what was happening there? Like, why was that invariant useful? And how did we do that? Well, that was because B, D, and E did not change, if you remember correctly, while only these two are changing. Now, the GCD of A comma C and the LCM of A comma C don't depend on B, D, or E, right? So you might say, okay, so how does that apply here? Well, now the distances of the other ones are not changing. Well, basically, you can get a sum of the distances of all the points, of all the line segments. And in this process, only these two are changing. So can you see the similarity between that and this? In here as well, AC plus BD changes to AD plus BC. But while the length segments of all the others doesn't change. Now we have no clarity how this helps. But once we find something that works, we could probably juice it out to get something here, right? That is, we now know that this distance is probably a good idea. We might hope that this is like a, an invariant, it doesn't change, but that's clearly not true. We can see by just by looking that AC plus BD is much longer than AD plus BC. But we might hope that it's a monovariant, right? It always reduces, so that we have something to work with. If the total distance reduces every time we uncross, we can do something about it, right? In the end, if we have the least distance thing, you cannot uncross it anymore. And indeed, if we prove this, it'll be nice. So let's try and prove it. Or actually check if it's true. So call this intersection point X. And it's actually you should, I think, the triangle inequality, and you could write AX plus XD is greater than AD, and BX plus XC is greater than BC, right? So I hope this is obvious. And sorry, I'm really sorry about this, but this is supposed to be this, right? So we need to show that this is true. I mean, we know this is true, and we need to show this is true. So we just, and what happens will we sum this up? Well, AX plus CX is AC, because the ACX is a straight line, and the other two add up to BD. So we've actually proved what we wanted to prove, right? We just add the two inequalities. So I hope you have some vague idea what's happening here, what we're trying to do here, right? I'll explain this question again. I'll review what we're doing. But in the moment we prove that the distances always reduce, strictly reduce when we're doing the process. That is uncrossing. We invented the uncrossing thing, and it always reduces. Okay. How is this useful? Okay, well, now we start randomly, right? We start at some random place where we have connected the end red to the end blue randomly, and in the end we want zero intersections. Now this is where the extremal principle guides us, because we have many different types of configurations, like many different types of ways to connect the end red points to the end blue points. In fact, you can actually count the number of ways, right? How many ways you can connect end blue points to end red points, um, with line segments. But the extremal principle says, okay, look, the distance reduces each time. So let's look at, out of all these things, for every configuration, we can assign a total distance. And what do I mean by total distance? The sum of distances, the quantity that we know decreases if we uncross, right? And but the extremal principle says, okay, say consider the least of these. You can look at the most as well, but since this always reduces, consider the least. That is, consider the configuration, consider the set of line segments, the end line segments that gives us the least line distance, length. And how does this help us? Well, say, assume for the sake of contradiction that there is some intersection here, that there is some intersection in that configuration, but then we can just uncross it and make the distance even lesser, right? We can uncross it and make the distance even lesser, which is a contradiction because we assumed that that was the least one. Okay, and so we're almost magically done. This exists because we can start with a random configuration and keep reducing the distance until you reach a minimum. And once you reach a minimum, there will be no intersection. There can't be any intersection, because if there is, you can just uncross it and make the total distance, even lesser, right? So that's what this problem was. And in case you didn't notice, the main idea in this problem was that the distance, that the distance uh, is a monovariant, right? So this is an example of where a monovariant is really useful, right? Okay, so I'm gonna recap now because I don't know, might have lost some of you on the way. So okay, so what did we do? So the question told us that there are a couple of line segments, right? So we could try a few things. That is, we could try to manually make a construction. That is, um, add in a few lines and add them in such a way that it works, right? So notice that there are two different things you can do. One, you can add in all the lines and take out as many of them until you have n left, or you can start with none of the lines and add in n lines so that it works out, right? Or a third opportunity, which is what we did, is start at any random n segments which may intersect and give an algorithm to construct the final answer, right? And this could probably be motivated by a couple of examples. You could try it out. So what did we do? We found an algorithm. That is, the algorithm is really simple. This process we have is really simple. We took one set of things and we uncrossed it, right? We replaced two line segments with two more, and the condition is still satisfied. We have n line segments because, and all the line segments are connected. So, but our first hope would be that the number of intersections reduce when this happens. If it did so, then it will keep reducing until we reach an end, right? But unfortunately, this does not work, which is easy to see by this. We can just show an example where it doesn't work, and we know that that fails now. Like, we can't hope for it to be remain same. And then we stood back and we asked, why is our invariant fail? Why did this fail? Why did the number of intersections not reduce? And we actually tried to think, why is it not reducing? And we realized that the answer was that that's um, because it's actually dependent on the geometry where these 4 points are, and what happens where we put the new lines actually influence the number of intersections. So good invariant here we noticed would be something that depends only on this. And we found something like that. We found the distance, right? And it's not an invariant, it's a monovariant because it reduces, which is just as well, because if we have something and it keeps reducing, once it becomes a minimum, right? We look at the minimum because the extremal principle says, look at the minimum, something may happen, right? We look at the minimum and we realize that at the minimum you can't uncross anymore. And if you can't uncross, that means there are no intersections, right? So that was this problem. So this might have been a little involved. So can anybody tell me if you have any doubts regarding this? Are there any questions? How much time do I have exactly?
I think it's been
It's
1
better.
hour.
It's better to wrap it up. Then we can move on to Q&A session. You can extend it about by 5 to 10 minutes, I guess.
All right.
I had a question,
Okay.
like about the experimental principle which you used in this recent example. I didn't understand that much. Can you please explain it once again? Like the least condition.
Right. So the extremal principle, like it's nothing concrete. Okay, it's not like this proper theorem or a principle or thing. It's a really vague thing, right? So it just says when you have a couple of things, when you have a group of objects, or when you have many things, look at something with the least value or the maximum value. One of these things, right? And here we'll notice that if we take, say, some 100 configurations, right, where each configuration is randomly drawn, or and we consider the one with the least distance, this thing, the sum of least distances, right? And actually, here the extremal principle doesn't state any more than you would do by common sense, right? I'm just stating that just for the sake of it, that look at the one with the least distance. Like, look at the configuration, look at the set of n line segments here, which has the least distance. The sum of distances is the least, right? Look at it, like try to analyze it. You may notice something. That's what the extremal principle saying. Look at it and you might notice something. And we actually do notice that in this case, because when we uncross, the distance reduces, right? And if we look at the least one, we can't reduce the distance anymore by definition because it's the least one. That means there are no intersections, or else we could have uncrossed it and reduced it even further. So it's actually state. So if we choose the one with the least distance, we're done, because that one cannot have any intersections, and so that satisfies the problem statements. So we actually gave a construction of sorts, an algorithm to start from any random configuration to go to any other. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so the least one, like particularly, I didn't understand like what exactly is the least one case. Like like you said that the distance in the extreme, according to the extremal principle, when we reach at the least distance, we are done. But what exactly is the least distance case? Is it that AC plus BD is equal to AD plus BC, something like that?
In the least distance case,
Yeah.
what do I mean by least distance? What do I mean by distance? I'm summing up the distance of all the line segments, right? So I'm summing up the line distance of all the line segments, right? So that's the, and this is true when we uncross. Like when we have an intersection and we uncross, this is true. And since the distances of all the other line segments remain the same, this proves that the distance reduces. This was to prove that the distance reduces when you uncross. Now, when you take the configuration, that is the set of line segments with the least distance, I am actually claiming that there are no intersections there. Okay, I'm claiming that there are no intersections there because if there are intersections, you can perform this process that you can uncross it and the distance reduces even more, because we proved that it reduces even more, right? We proved that when we do this, the distance reduces, the sum of distances reduces. And okay, so now if we consider the configuration with the least distance, the least sum of distances, we can't do this process anymore. Like, because if we do this process anymore, if we are able to do this process, that means the distance can reduce. But we assume that that's the configuration with the least distance. Like did you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, just had like confusion in that. Is there any numerical value for the least distance? Sort
No,
of
no,
like
no,
that.
no, 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 no,
Ah,
no,
okay,
no, no,
thanks.
no. It's sort of vague. I understand what you're trying to say. It might be sort of vague, and that's the thing where we are actually not looking at everything. See, the thing is, when you're using an invariant or a monovariant, you'll often notice that you're not looking at the entire problem, right? So, for example, when you're looking at the 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 previous problem where we looked at the parity, the example 12, where we looked at the parity of the differences, we only looked at the difference if it's odd or even. We didn't notice a lot of things. We didn't actually care between 110 or 150 and 10, because the odd even status is still the same in both of them. So we're actually losing out on a lot of information, but it solves the problem, right? The problem expects us to only look at one aspect of the thing. And here we notice that we actually don't know what's happening to the distances, except for the fact that it reduces. That's all we know. We only know the distance reduces. We don't know anything more than that. But by the simple fact, we have actually solved the problem, because in the end, you can't have any intersections. Right?
Yeah. Yes. That clears my confusion.
Um, so as an end, I'll just show what happens to example 13 really quickly so that we can move on. Right? Okay, so I'll just quickly show the solution for example 13. So we already found out that the product is the same. And you know what? I think I'll actually skip example 13 because it'll actually take some time, right? So I think I can stop here if that's okay. Because any of these other
Yeah.
examples will take
Like
some
you
time.
can send this.
I'll
sure,
send the
you
You can
can.
send the
solution.
solutions.
Huh?
Yep.
Yeah, you can share the questions later and we'll
Yeah.
provide students with them.
Right.
Uh,
I'll share the solution for example 13 and 16. You can try these two questions. They're nice.
sure. I think that's it for the session. Let's move on to the questions and answer session. If anybody in the audience had any question during the session which they could not ask, please ask it now. right, I think there aren't any. So I'll refer to the form, registration form, and ask you some questions that came there. Are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So you are only at grade 11. You are a grade 11 student, and you have already made it to IMOTC. When did you start preparing, and how was your experience? How was your journey? What difficulties did you face?
So I started in ninth grade. I started at the end of ninth grade, I think, right? And I actually spent a lot of time learning on my own. And one thing is that there's very little resources that's and most people even here in India don't know about math Olympiads, right? Actual math Olympiads. So you'll notice that's a problem, right? So unless, like, except in a few countries, say the USA, Russia, etc., uh, encouragement in math Olympiads is actually less even in most other countries. Um, so which is a sad thing. Uh, so I actually, for a lot of time, I learned on my own using various resources of the internet, and there are actually many resources in the internet that you can use, and nowadays you can find almost anything. For example, for um, for geometry, you have Imagine's book, and there are many books. Like, so I basically try to solve on my own and learn on my own. Yeah, so I think that's it.
Thank you for your answer. Yeah, I do agree that there is not enough awareness about mathematics Olympiad in the context of Nepal. I don't really know about India. Um, the next question is, which books have you used for your preparation?
Um, so one book, let's see. So one book that I'll highly recommend, that I started with that book, and it's a really, really nice book, is this book called The Art and Craft of Problem Solving by Paul Zietz. So this is a really nice book, right? I'm not sure, but I think you could find the free PDF online. I'm not completely sure of this. This is a really nice book. It explains all sorts of ideas and introduces everything from the beginning. So you should be able to find this online. It's a really nice book, right? It's a very nice introductory book. In any case, there are also the official AOPS books, and I've not used them personally, but everybody keeps recommending them, so I think they must be good. The AOPS Volume 1 and AOPS Volume 2. Uh, I'd actually recommend, if you haven't already joined AOPS Art of Problem Solving, the website. If you are, like, you should, right? And now and then you could just try and take a problem and ask if you have a doubt, or try a problem from the so many problems that are there. In any case, some other slightly advanced books. One would be Problem Solving Strategies by Arthur Angle, of course, EGMO by Ivan Shell. Then there's a book called Modern Olympiad Number Theory by Aditya Kurbi. These are all. Uh, you can actually find this on Ivan Shell's website. There's a recommendation page with a list of books, right? You should be able to find it on his website. He has listed most of the good books. I have done this book. This one, I suspect that many of you are still starting out, and I think that this book will help you a lot, right? Uh, yeah, so I think that's it.
Thank you for your answer. I recommend everybody to check out Ivan Chain's website again for the books and the books that have been mentioned. Our next question is, apart from mathematics Olympiads, you also are involved in many other Olympiads. Maybe I heard about astronomy Olympiad. How do you manage your time preparing and practicing for all these Olympiads? Because I have seen people fully dedicate their time to preparing only for mathematical Olympiads, and they cannot even manage their time for that only.
Um, so as I don't think see, the thing is, whenever you're practicing, you should practice properly. Like, I've noticed people who keep like, to be honest, I've noticed people who keep practicing for these things for hours every day and not get it because they're not actually analyzing themselves. So after every problem, you need to actually look back, try to look at other solutions. If you didn't get it, then try properly. Try to build your intuition, be concrete. For example, if you didn't get this problem, that is, if you didn't get this Putnam problem, and you should think what went wrong with my approach, and you should think, okay, so what approach are they talking about? So in this case, they're saying, oh wait, like make a random configuration and try to reach. And this idea is useful in many places, right? Because where you don't have something to work with, like this is a very concrete, like sort of vague idea. If you don't have something to work with, get yourself something to work with. So this is something that you can learn while doing it, and you can apply it in other places. So the thing is, practice properly. Like don't let questions go easily. I'll try to learn from a question. And about managing time, I I don't think that should be too big of a problem. That's because uh, like w- I usually practice math Olympiads. Like I usually sit for like 2 or 3 days a week, and on those days I sit for like 4 or 5 hours at a time and try 3 or 4 problems a day. That's like not more than that, and I try to understand those problems completely, even if I solve them, and try to learn something new maybe. And if you keep doing this every week, you'll be astounded at the amount of progress that you can make in a year or something. Like don't start in the days 1 month before the math Olympiad. Like practice throughout the year, and like you'll actually get unbelievably far, right? Yeah, so that's it.
Thank you. That was a really helpful answer and great advice. You may have been asked this a lot, but I'll ask again. Any tips for beginners who are just starting to prepare for mathematical Olympiads?
uh okay, so one thing is when you're practicing, um when you're practicing, make sure you actually try you try the problem for like an hour or so, because usually when we're in school, etc., um we usually don't try a problem for that much amount of time. So you might not be used to this. Like your brain is actually thinking, okay, wait, this we have tried this problem for 15 minutes. It's time to give up. It's time to look for a hit. Don't give up. Try a good math Olympiad problem should be at least tried for at least 1 hour before like getting a hint or giving up, etc. The next thing is very important thing is to be structured. That is, don't do things that might not help you. Like don't randomly uh, don't do things that won't help you. Try to learn concretely. Learn things that help you. For example, I've heard I've seen people learning many in geometry, especially learning theorems and lemmas, which appear very rarely. Learning many of them or something like that, and make sure your basics are amazing. That's the important thing, right? Because every problem in the IMO can be solved with basic things, right? For example, any geometry problem can be solved by the first three chapters, like basic angle chasing, circles, power of point, radical axis, or lengths. These three things can solve all problems. So what I'm trying to say is, when you're learning as a beginner, make sure you're not trapped by those. Try to learn all. Try to learn many complicated techniques, don't try to learn many complicated techniques, new theorems. This Try to make sure your basics are perfect. Try to make sure you're understanding what you're doing perfectly, because most problems can be solved by the basic things, right? So yeah, that's one thing. And another thing would be, um, yeah, as much as you can, try to write down the solution, right? It helps a lot whenever you solve problem, even at your house. I admit I don't do this all the time. I try to do it as much as possible. Whenever you do a solution, write it down, like what you would do in a math Olympiad. You actually realize a lot of things when you do this. So try to do that. You might notice a lot of things. And so that's one thing. uh and analyze yourself, right? Analyze yourself. And this applies to anything in general, but yeah, analyze yourself, see what's happening, etc. And I don't think I'm the best suited to give this answer in any case, because there are so many other by actual experts like Eval Chen and others who have actually recommended for beginners. I could actually point you to some of those better pages. But yeah, that's that.
Thank you. It was really great advice. The last question for today. Um, So where would you recommend somebody should start? Should one jump right into I am a question, or should one look out for questions that are very simple? Where did you start, and how do you recommend others to start?
Um, you don't jump into IMO questions. There's not much point in doing that. Um, to be honest, like there are one or two IMO questions which are easily solvable, right? Without much, especially combinatorics problems because they're mostly logic. What try this book out. It'll take you to some level at least. At some point you just realize what you have to do, and you realize that there's some things to learn and some things you have to practice, etc. uh, if you want to know, so there are certain easier Olympiads and there are certain harder Olympiads. Easier Olympiads include like the British Math Olympiad. Round one is easy, I believe. And it's easy in the sense it's a math Olympiad which you can actually try out. It's nice. And RMO is another, like regional math Olympiad in India is one more. It's sort of easy. You can try some problems from there. And I think the British Math Olympiad is pretty okay as well. It's nice, I think. Um, and I think the Iranian Math Olympiad, the first round is also easy. So there are certain Math Olympiads which are easier than the others, and you could actually start from there. They have easier problems, and you can go to the harder ones slowly. Once you get the easier ones, you should be able to solve better and better. For example, for geometry, Evangel's book, Euclidean Geometry and Math Olympiads, once you solve most of the questions there, you should be able to have a comfortable grasp of at least you should be able to recognize problems and recognize the solutions. That's important. So I can't give like people are of different levels, and wherever you are, the best thing to do is to see this. Like whenever you solve solve a question, like if you're able to solve a question, then you're at a good level, right? Of course, and you should probably try to go to a higher level where you can't solve a question, right? uh, if you can't solve the question, see the solution. So there are a couple of things like that is after trying for a while. So there are a couple of different things that you can see. You can either get the solution immediately, like as soon as you see the solution, you might understand what's happening. You might understand the idea of the solution. You might think, oh, I should have gotten that. That happens, right? You might have said, I should have gotten that solution. Um, so that means that you're at the correct level. Like those are problems you should practice and things. But there are times in which the solution, you don't understand the solution at all, or it seems that like you have no idea what's going on. Like you can figure it out if you figure out what's happening at each step, but you have no idea, zero idea how somebody could have even thought of that. That means you're at the wrong level. That means you should make yourself, you should push your bar down and try something easier, right? Don't be afraid to give up when something like that happens. And nevertheless, you should try to understand the solution properly. But there are sites like that. Like if it's too difficult to you, put a bar down. If it's hard, try to try to go a little higher, right? And but nevertheless, always try harder problems. Like don't try if you're always able to solve some questions, it's time you try for something harder. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah. That answers my question. So I guess that concludes the Q&A session as well. Thank you very much, Abhay, for joining us and giving this session. It was really wonderful. Your explanations were great, and the illustrations were also very great. Thank you very much from my team, and I thank you everybody who joined here. This session will also be uploaded in our YouTube channel, so please check your email for the link. Thank you.